MSNBC Hee Haw's Joy Reid has never seen a race card she couldn't pick up and play.
We begin tonight with the fallout over the tragic death of Tyre Nichols at the hands of 5 Memphis police officers. Now, if you have a heart, what happened to the 29-year-old father, skateboarder, FedEx driver, and amateur photographer should outrage you. It should shock and disgust you, as should the so-called brothers who chose to behave like a little blue gang rather than as black men. But it damn sure shouldn't surprise you. What happened to Tyre Nichols was as American as apple pie. From the start, the European colonies in the Americas were designed to produce 2 kinds of people, subjects and citizens, and violence was at the center of it all. Even once they left Europe in the early 17th century, the colonizers of this continent remained the subjects of the European kings.
Good Lord. By the way, she went to Harvard. Pretty impressed. Odd that somebody so angry has a first name of Joy. There's got to be a lawsuit there somewhere. Joining me to discuss this is Soledad Ursua, Venice Neighborhood Council board member who also writes for the City Journal, published by the Manhattan Institute. Soledad, why the radio-free silence on behalf of our new mayor as to the killings in Benedict Canyon?
That's a good question, Larry. Just this past weekend, and think about Karen Bass, what she signifies for Los Angeles. Many people have really praised her. She is the first Black female mayor of Los Angeles. She's really made history here, but she seems very silent in this case where 3 of these victims, these young women, are presumably Black women, and she really has done very little to seek justice for them. So one might use her same logic and ask her if she would treat this matter differently if there were 3 white males who were dead. Would she follow up on this case? Would she call for their justice? She's gone very quiet in this, and it seems that this shooting just really doesn't fit the narrative that Democrats like to throw out. And so everybody is suddenly getting very quiet about this.
As I pointed out in my monologue, Soledad, for years, the police have killed more unarmed whites than they've killed unarmed blacks. Studies have shown the police are slightly more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. But when it's a white unarmed person, nobody seems to give a rip.
That's right. And those facts just don't matter. What people want to do is use this to really antagonize minorities against each other, to create a sense of distrust. Again, they are just going on this playbook to keep themselves in power, and they're doing really little to keep these communities safe. This shooting, it was a party house, an Airbnb house in a very wealthy area. And I wonder if we would have heard about this if it happened in a low-income neighborhood, because the definition of a mass shooting is with 4 people shot at one incident. So you have to wonder how many mass shootings are going on in a weekend in South Los Angeles, or what about Chicago? None of those stories ever make the news.
That's a good point. 2 weekends ago, 30 people shot in Chicago, 7 fatally, did not make the news. And the truth is, the reason the police are in black communities, as the professor from Columbia, Kimberly Crenshaw, put it, Soledad, targeting black communities, is because that's where the crime is. A young black man aged between 10 and 34 years old is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white male, same age, and almost always the murderer is a young black male. That's why the cops are there.
Yes. And, Karen Bass, she should really learn that, she has been working sort of on a federal role. Now she is the mayor of a big city, and she really needs to work to come together and work to make communities safer. She should also really be careful what she's suggesting, because if you remember, she does not have a great track record with gun safety. This past September, 2 of her guns were stolen from her home. The guns have never been located. And what people will know is, what happens with stolen guns? They're often used in murders. So she herself has put 2 guns on the street. So she should be very careful what she says about these mass shootings.
Great point. The other thing is this. There's something called the Ferguson effect or the Minneapolis effect. They're probably now going to call it the Tyre Nichols effect. And that's when cops pull back. They no longer engage in proactive policing because they fear being called systemically racist. I interviewed a data scientist for Thomson Reuters. His name is Isaac Kriegman, Soledad. He did a study, and he found out because of the cop pullback in just 5 major cities, there were literally hundreds of what he called excess deaths In other words, black people killed who otherwise wouldn't have been killed if the police had been proactive. So it's not just a lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism. It's not just offensive. It is getting people killed, the very black people that people on the left claim that they care about.
And there are some groups that are really taking advantage of the situation. For instance, over this past weekend, Black Lives Matter was here. They were marching. They shut down Pacific Coast Highway, which is Lincoln Boulevard and Venice. They shut down traffic in all directions for about 3.5 hours. No emergency vehicles could get in or out. After about 3.5 hours, the crowd got more agitated and they marched to the house of our newly elected councilwoman, Tracy Parks' home. And they were chanting for her to come out. Patrisse Cullors, you may remember when Candace Owens showed up at her house and rang her doorbell. And Cullors was in tears saying that it shook her and this was her safety. But here she is on Sunday ringing the doorbell of Tracy Park, telling her to come out because she wants to talk to her. And she has about 200, protesters there with her. So what you see here is, LAPD is scared. They're backing off. Many of these groups are really using this to their advantage.
Another thing that's happened too, let's look at these cops that beat Tyre Nichols. They were fired. They should have been fired. I don't know any cop I've talked to who says the beating was justified. But would these 5 cops have even been cops under normal hiring criteria? The biggest scandal where you and I live in Los Angeles is the so-called Rampart scandal a few years ago. It inspired the movie Training Day that Denzel Washington starred in. These guys were basically thugs who never would have made the police force had it not been for them waiving certain kinds of standards. The lead guy is named Rafael Perez. Turned out he had applied at several police departments, Soledad, got rejected because he couldn't pass a background check. LAPD hired him. So because of lower standards, because of the push for diversity, because of the lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism, applications are down, people are resigning earlier or retiring or transferring to other departments. There's a manpower shortage, and I wonder whether or not these Memphis cops would have even become cops if it hadn't been for all of those kinds of things.
Yes, that's a good question. If you want better cops, you need to invest in better training. So defund the police is not going to work. And, it's very unfortunate that all of this happened. But policing in America is becoming incredibly volatile. It's a thankless job. It's a very dangerous job. And nobody wants to become the next sensation where they're involved in a murder. I'm sure that they all wish that there was something that would have come out differently in the situation. So everything is getting incredibly volatile, and it's just police are having a very tough time recruiting new and qualified candidates.
And finally, Soledad, I got to say, there's a through line with all of these high-profile deaths at the hands of police officers. Virtually none of the suspects complied. Doesn't justify the beatdown that Tyre Nichols experienced, but honestly, if suspects complied, the so-called black leaders, if Whoopi Goldberg and Barack and Michelle Obama who weighed in, and Mayor Bass who weighed in, if they encouraged young black men to comply, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I think you're absolutely correct. It's sad to see all of this transpire. The videos are all very difficult to watch.
Soledad Ursua, as always, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.